The rain had been falling all day, slicking the sidewalks of the crowded city with a sheen of silver that reflected neon lights and restless footsteps. People hurried past each other beneath umbrellas, heads bowed, eyes distracted by glowing screens, hardly noticing anyone outside their own bubble of thoughts. Among them moved a woman who seemed to belong to the blur of the ordinary. She wore a simple gray coat, hood pulled low, carrying a plain black bag over her shoulder, and walked at an unhurried pace as though she had nowhere special to be. Her hair, damp from the drizzle, clung in dark strands around her pale cheeks, and her boots clicked softly against the pavement, the sound nearly swallowed by the city's chorus of car horns, rain gutters and distant chatter. Nobody gave her a second glance, and she preferred it that way. To the strangers who brushed past, she was just another commuter, perhaps a secretary heading home, maybe a student too tired from her classes, or even a lonely woman wandering after work. What they could not guess, what nobody in this rushing world could even begin to imagine, was that this woman had once been the most feared operative in an organization that officially did not exist. And tonight, as fate aligned its pieces in ways unseen, that past would claw itself out of the shadows. She ducked into a narrow alley, stepping aside to avoid a pair of soaked men unloading boxes from the back of a truck. The scent of damp cardboard and spilled beer mixed with the sharp metallic tang of the wet air. She kept walking, her eyes flicking briefly to the reflection in a shop window. The glass caught more than her own outline. It showed 3 figures across the street, loitering with the pretense of casual smokers. They had been there for 2 blocks now, matching her pace, never too close, never too far. Trained eyes could see what ordinary pedestrians could not. The stiffness of men trying to look natural, the darting glances that gave away intent, the way their hands hovered near their jackets. She slowed her step just slightly, timing the rhythm of her breathing with the rain's patter. Her heart didn't race. She had known this day would come, though she had hoped it might be later rather than now. She passed the alley, merged with another stream of pedestrians, and turned her face toward the glow of a small diner at the corner, where laughter and warm light spilled onto the wet street. To anyone watching, she looked indecisive, maybe even weary, like someone debating whether to stop for a late dinner. But her mind was already mapping escape routes, angles, shadows, and distances. The world that others ignored, the trash can near the lamppost, the construction scaffolding across the street, the narrow gap between 2 shuttered stores, was alive with possibilities to her. Every inch was a piece of terrain, every surface a tool, every passerby a factor in an invisible equation. Inside the diner, she slid into a booth by the window. The waitress, chewing gum and looking bored, scribbled her order without care. Just coffee. Her hands cupped the mug when it arrived, steam coiling against her face. Across the glass, the 3 shadows had multiplied into 5. One leaned on a lamppost pretending to check his phone, another pretended to argue with his friend. Their eyes scanned too deliberately, too often, always in her direction. She stirred the coffee with a slow motion, letting the warmth seep into her bones, and she wondered, not for the first time, how long she could keep living with this illusion of being ordinary. She had done well these past 2 years. No weapons, no violence, no traces of her past life. She worked at a bookstore, smiled at neighbors, paid her rent on time. She had convinced herself she could blend in forever. But predators always smell what others can't. These men weren't street thugs nor random watchers. Their posture screamed training, the kind that came from months of drills and bruises. They were hunting her not because of who she was now, but because of what she had once been. And that past, like a ghost chained to her soul, was now demanding resurrection. She left a bill on the table and walked out without finishing her drink. The rain had eased into a drizzle, the air sharp with the smell of ozone. She crossed the street, passing beneath the lamppost where one of the men pretended to scroll through his phone. Her eyes didn't touch him, but her senses drank him in. The faint bulge of a pistol beneath his jacket, the tautness in his shoulders, the subtle shift of his stance as she drew near. She continued walking, turning into another alley. To a normal woman, this path would be a mistake, too dark and too quiet, cut off from the street's safety. To her, it was a stage being set, curtains about to draw back. As expected, their footsteps followed. Not hurried, not yet, but close enough. She counted them without looking back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. More than she had seen before. They were tightening the circle, hurting her deeper, thinking they were the hunters. She walked until the alley narrowed between 2 graffiti-stained walls, puddles glimmering beneath the dim flicker of a broken light. Then she stopped. Her hand went to her bag, but not for a weapon. She needed no steel to begin. She adjusted the straps slowly, deliberately, as if nervous. In reality, her muscles were aligning, her breathing slowing into that cold place she thought she had buried forever. Behind her, the first voice called out, too casual to be true. "Hey lady." "Lost." The laughter of another followed. The sound was wrong in this rain-soaked silence, too harsh, too forced. She turned at last to face them. The 6 men fanned out in the narrow passage. They thought numbers gave them power, that intimidation would crack her mask. They saw only a slim woman in a gray coat, small in stature, damp hair clinging to her face. What they did not see was the shift in her eyes, the stillness of a predator calculating distance to prey. She tilted her head slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was soft, almost gentle, yet it sliced the air. "If you want to leave alive, you should walk away now." The words earned nothing but cruel grins. One of them spat on the ground, stepping closer. "Lady, you don't get it. We're the ones who decide who walks away." She almost pitied him, because in that instant, the past inside her uncoiled like a serpent freed from its cage. She dropped the bag to the ground. The sound of it hitting the wet pavement was a signal only she understood. The moment the ordinary woman ceased to exist, and something far more dangerous took her place. Her first motion was faster than sight. She stepped forward into the nearest man's space, her hand striking his wrist with surgical precision, snapping it before he even realized she had moved. The gun he'd been reaching for clattered to the ground, and she pivoted, driving her elbow into his throat. He collapsed, choking, stunned by the impossibility of what had just happened. Before the others could react, she spun low, sweeping another's legs from beneath him, sending him crashing into the puddles. The alley erupted with shouts and curses, but her movements were already 3 steps ahead of them. She wasn't fighting them, she was dismantling them, piece by piece, with the economy of someone who had spent years reducing chaos into control. A punch drove into her ribs, she turned with it, absorbing, redirecting, then slammed her attacker's head into the brick wall with a dull crack. Another lunged with a knife. She caught his wrist, twisted, and used his own blade to cut a line across his forearm before throwing him backward. They had thought she was prey, but in 5 seconds the illusion had shattered. Fear crept into their faces, a fear too late to save them. She had warned them, but men like these never listened. And now, they would learn what it meant to provoke the ghost they had hunted. The man with the broken wrist groaned on the ground, clutching his arm, his wide eyes locked on her as if staring at something supernatural. She didn't pause to watch him suffer. Her body moved on instinct, sharper and quicker than conscious thought. Another came at her from behind, a heavy shadow lunging with brute force. She pivoted sideways at the last moment, grabbed his jacket collar, and used his own momentum to hurl him over her shoulder. He landed flat on his back in the puddles with a hollow smack that stole the air from his lungs. Before he could gasp for breath, her boot came down hard against his sternum, pinning him as she twisted to meet the next threat. A blade flashed. She ducked, felt the whoosh of air as the knife passed over her hood. Her hand shot up like lightning, seizing his wrist, twisting it outward until the tendon strained and the knife clattered free. The sharp edge skittered across the ground, lost in shadows. Without hesitation, she brought her knee up into his ribs, once, twice, each strike precise and devastating. He folded, his body collapsing against the wall like discarded cloth. The smell of sweat and rain mingled with the copper tang of blood in the air. The alley was a storm of movement, yet she moved through it like a dancer, every strike and block flowing seamlessly into the next. The world slowed for her in these moments. Each man's movement telegraphed itself long before it happened, every breath and every twitch feeding her calculations. What to them was chaos was to her absolute clarity. One of the men, younger than the rest, backed away, fear flashing in his eyes. He raised trembling hands. "Wait. We didn't know you're—" His words faltered, lost in panic, but she already knew what he had realized. They hadn't been sent to mug a random woman. They had been sent for her. Whoever was pulling their strings hadn't warned them about who they were facing. She could see it in their movements. Mercenaries, yes, but second tier. Not the best. Not the kind her old employers used to send. Cannon fodder meant to test the waters, to flush her out of hiding. A message disguised as an ambush. She advanced on the young man slowly, her boots splashing in shallow puddles. His breath came in ragged gulps. She could see him deciding whether to run, whether his legs would carry him faster than her eyes could. He chose wrong. He bolted, twisting into the wider street beyond the alley. For a moment she let him think he was free. Then, in one fluid motion, she scooped the knife from the ground, spun it by the hilt, and flung it with a sharp flick of her wrist. The blade sang through the rain-soaked air before burying itself in the wooden post just inches from his head. He froze, paralyzed by the closeness of death. She didn't need to chase him. Fear would do the work for her. She turned back to the others, her shadow stretching long across the wet ground. 4 men writhed in pain, 2 were unconscious, 1 was gone in spirit though his heart still beat. That left 6 standing at the alley's edge, reinforcements who had hung back until now. They were smarter, moving in tighter formation, more deliberate in their advance. She recognized the pattern instantly. These were not street wolves, they moved like soldiers. The warm-up was over. The real test had arrived. Her pulse didn't race, but her breath deepened, her senses sharpening. Memories long buried forced their way back. The sterile rooms of training facilities, the harsh bark of instructors drilling into her bones that hesitation meant death, the endless repetition of disarms and counters until they became reflex. She had hated it then, had sworn she would one day escape that cage. And yet here she was, years later, moving with the same deadly grace they had carved into her. One of the 6 drew his pistol, the motion crisp, professional. She dropped instantly, rolling sideways behind a metal trash bin just as the first shot cracked through the air. Sparks flew as the bullet ricocheted off steel. The sharp sting of gunpowder burned her nostrils, blending with the storm's wet breath. Another shot followed, then another, each one echoing in the narrow corridor. She remained low, counting the rhythm of their shots. Ammunition was finite, patience even more so. When the briefest pause came, she struck. She leapt from cover, her hand snatching a length of broken pipe from the ground, and closed the distance before the nearest man could re-aim. The pipe whistled through the air and connected with his forearm, sending his gun flying. She twisted, jabbing the jagged end into his solar plexus, forcing the air from his lungs. He dropped, retching. In the same motion, she snatched the fallen gun, her fingers wrapping around it with the familiarity of an old companion she swore she'd never touch again. The cold weight was a reminder of what she had once been, and in that instant, denial ceased. Jim. Her first shot took the kneecap of the man nearest the dumpster. He howled, collapsing in a splash of dirty water. She pivoted smoothly, disarming the second with a well-placed bullet to the wrist. The gunfire cracked like thunder in the enclosed alley, amplified into a roar. Panic rippled through the mercenaries, but she pressed forward with relentless precision, every bullet chosen, never wasted. She didn't aim to kill, not yet, but to dismantle, to strip away their confidence, to remind them they were ants crawling before something they didn't understand. Within 30 seconds, 3 more were down, writhing on the ground, their weapons useless beside them. Only 2 remained upright, their fear barely contained behind hardened jaws. They exchanged a glance, silent agreement flashing in their eyes. She knew what they would do even before they moved. They would attack together, try to overwhelm her in unison. Predictable. She braced as they lunged, one swinging a knife, the other aiming low to tackle her legs. She spun, catching the knife hand mid-strike, twisting it outward and forcing the blade deep into the wall instead of her flesh. Her knee shot upward into his chin, snapping his head back with a wet crack. At the same time she kicked backward, her boot connecting with the second man's temple as he dove. He collapsed sideways, his body limp, consciousness gone before he hit the puddle. The silence afterward was deafening, broken only by the rain's soft tapping and the groans of the fallen. Her chest rose and fell, not from exhaustion but from the quiet rage simmering beneath her calm exterior. She stood among 12 men, some unconscious, some crippled, some barely clinging to awareness. All eliminated in less than 5 minutes. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't sought it. Yet here it was, proof that the past refused to remain buried. She wiped her damp hair back from her face, her eyes scanning the shadows at the alley's mouth. For a long moment no more came. But she knew better than to believe it was finished. Whoever had sent them would be watching, listening, waiting for a report. Her message had already been sent. She was alive. Dangerous and unwilling to run anymore. She retrieved her bag from where it had fallen, slinging it back over her shoulder. As she stepped over the groaning bodies, she felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only inevitability. The game had resumed. And this time there would be no hiding. She melted back into the rain-drenched streets, leaving the broken behind her. Neon signs blinked overhead, advertising noodles, cigarettes, and cheap motels. Pedestrians still hurried by, oblivious to the carnage hidden in the narrow artery behind them. She blended among them once more, a gray shadow in a sea of umbrellas. But inside, the storm had already begun. She knew what came next. More enemies, more hunts, until she uncovered the hand pulling the strings. Her ordinary life was gone. The woman who shelved books at the corner shop, who nodded politely at her neighbors, who pretended to be small and harmless, she was dead. What walked now was the ghost, the legend whispered about in certain circles with dread. And if they wanted her back in the game, she would play. But the rules would be hers. The city's heartbeat throbbed around her, muffled beneath the endless drizzle. She walked with measured steps, her hood drawn low, every sense alert though her outward appearance betrayed none of it. The people who brushed past her had no idea they were moving alongside a storm wearing human skin. They saw only an anonymous woman, thin, damp, unremarkable. None of them could imagine that minutes earlier she had crippled and dismantled 12 armed men as easily as someone swats flies. She kept her stride casual, resisting the instinct to sprint, to vanish. Running now would only draw eyes. The kind of eyes she could not afford. Her reflection in a shop window caught her attention. Calm face, pale under the neon haze, lips pressed in a thin line. She looked like someone tired after work, maybe lonely, maybe ordinary. That illusion had saved her life before. But the moment tonight proved it would not save her much longer. They had found her. The game she thought she had abandoned was already rewriting itself around her. Somewhere, behind computer screens and encrypted comms, someone was watching the fallout of her survival. They would know their hired men had failed. They would know she was no longer dormant. And they would send more. Better. Smarter. Relentless. She turned into a quieter street, the kind lined with shuttered shops and dim apartments. A faint buzz from a faulty neon sign hummed in the distance. Every doorway, every shadow, every rooftop became a possible nest for eyes. She checked her surroundings, subtle and deliberate, reflections in windows, the rhythm of footsteps behind her, the hum of passing cars. Her old instincts, once dulled by 2 years of pretending to be someone else, roared back with vicious clarity. A part of her almost welcomed it. The world seemed sharper, every detail etched in perfect focus. But with that clarity came the weight of what it meant. She was back in the shadows whether she wanted it or not. She ducked into a laundromat that glowed pale blue under fluorescent lights. The air smelled of detergent and hot metal. A row of machines churned rhythmically, a hypnotic hum filling the space. Only 2 other customers sat inside, both too absorbed in their phones to care about her presence. She moved to the back corner, slipping her bag onto the seat beside her. From it, she drew a phone. Not the cheap, public one she used for her civilian life, but the slim, hardened device she swore she'd never power on again. For 2 years it had stayed buried in the lining of her bag, switched off, waiting for the day she feared might come. Her thumb hovered over the button. Once it was alive, there would be no turning back. It would ping satellites, reopen channels she had cut, and in doing so, announce to the world that she was alive. Still she pressed it. The screen flickered to life, bathing her pale face in cold light. A security sequence appeared, layers of codes and patterns only she could navigate. Her fingers moved with remembered precision, unlocking the gate she had sealed behind her when she left. The device buzzed, connecting, sending, receiving. Within seconds, messages bloomed across the encrypted interface. Alerts, traces, signals she could barely process all at once. Most damning of all was a flagged feed. Contract issued. Target, Cassandra Vale. Status, alive. Location, unknown. Her name. Not the bookstore clerk's alias she had lived under, not the false identity papers she carried. Her real name. Cassandra Vale. The ghost. The weapon they had built, used, and then tried to erase. The sight of it on the screen pulled at something buried deep in her chest. She hadn't heard anyone speak that name aloud in years. It was a scar, a reminder of a time when she had been owned by men in suits who thought they could shape lives like clay, molding her into the perfect killer. And now, her name was back in circulation. The contract wasn't random. It had weight behind it. Whoever wanted her dead had power, money, and reach. She scrolled further, eyes scanning through layers of encoded chatter. A symbol repeated often, a black serpent swallowing its tail. She knew it instantly. A faction within the same organization that had once trained her. They weren't just cleaning up loose ends. They were hunting her because she had left, because she knew too much, because her existence alone threatened the myth of their control. She set the phone down, exhaling slowly. Memories bled into her mind uninvited. Cold rooms where she was stripped of a name, given numbers instead, drills that pushed her beyond exhaustion, missions that painted her hands with stains she could never wash away. She remembered the first time she disobeyed, the first time she chose not to kill a target, and how they had punished her for weakness. That weakness had saved her soul. And it was the same defiance that had driven her to vanish, to carve a new life among ordinary people, selling books and drinking coffee like she was human again. She clenched her jaw. Whoever had reopened this hunt wasn't just after her death. They wanted to send a message, No one leaves. The hum of the laundromat machines pulled her back to the present. The two customers were gone. Alone, she stared at the screen of her phone. There were only two choices now: keep running or turn around and face the serpent that had uncoiled to devour her. She thought of the 12 broken men she left in the alley. That was only the beginning. If she ran, more would follow, and eventually one would succeed. If she fought, she might die faster, but she might also carve out a chance to burn the serpent's nest before it spread further. And then there was the lingering whisper in her chest, the one that told her she wasn't fighting only for survival. She was fighting to reclaim her life, her name, her identity stolen and twisted. Cassandra Vale. She closed the device, powered it down, and slipped it back into her bag. For now she needed shelter. A place to regroup, to plan, to prepare. The rain had picked up again as she stepped out into the street, hammering the pavement in steady sheets. Neon lights bled across wet asphalt like melted paint. She kept walking, weaving through the storm, her mind already running calculations. Weapons, allies, safe houses. Most of her caches were gone, long abandoned. But she knew of one, an apartment on the far edge of the city, locked under a false name, stocked years ago with just enough to restart if she ever needed it. She would go there tonight. And tomorrow she would begin her own hunt. Because whoever dared drag her name back into the open had made a grave mistake. They had reminded her of what she was. The storm thickened as she moved through the night, her shadow long and sharp beneath the glow of street lamps. Somewhere far above, in windows of high towers, she knew they were watching, already recalibrating their plans. Let them. She was done hiding. Cassandra Vale had returned. And this time she would not be their weapon. She would be their reckoning. The journey to the edge of the city took her nearly an hour, every minute spent in the kind of silence that thrummed with unseen danger. Cassandra never took the same route twice. She shifted from bus to subway, slipped out early through crowded exits, crossed bridges on foot, and ducked through back streets where shadows were her cover. Each stop, each pause, was deliberate, designed to flush out a tale if there was one. Twice she spotted suspicious figures lingering at a platform's edge, and twice she vanished into the tide of commuters before they could fix on her. Rain soaked through her coat and dripped from her hood, but she welcomed the chill. It kept her sharp. By the time she reached the derelict block of apartments that loomed on the outskirts of the city, the night had stretched deep and the streets were nearly empty. The building looked like it had been forgotten by time. Cracked bricks, windows dark, the faint smell of mildew clinging to the air. Perfect. Ordinary eyes saw abandonment. To her, it was sanctuary. She approached the third-floor unit like a surgeon preparing for a delicate incision. First, she circled the building once, checking alleys, rooftops, the rhythm of traffic. Then she slipped through the rusted side door, counting each step, each creak of floorboards, her body tensed like a drawn bow. The door to the apartment bore a rusted lock that would fool anyone into thinking it had not been touched in years. She pressed her palm to the frame, feeling for tension, for the give of tampering. Nothing. Still, she used the key carefully, and when the door swung open, stale air greeted her like a long-dead memory. She stepped inside, shut the door behind her, and immediately went to work. Curtains drawn, lights low, she scanned the space. Furniture draped with sheets, dust thick on every surface. To a stranger, it was abandoned. To her, it was exactly as she had left it. The first cache was under the floorboards in the bedroom. She knelt, pried up a warped plank, and pulled out a sealed box wrapped in heavy plastic. Inside lay a pistol, gleaming even in the dim light, 3 loaded magazines, a combat knife, and a compact medical kit. The touch of the pistol was like ice against her palm, stirring muscle memory she had tried to suppress. She checked each weapon, cleaned the chamber, tested the knife's balance. Everything was intact. She set them on the bed, then retrieved the second cache hidden behind the false panel of a closet wall. This one held a change of clothes, stacks of unmarked bills, forged IDs, and a small laptop hardened with layers of encryption. She laid them out methodically, every item becoming a piece of the arsenal she would need. The ordinary woman she had played for 2 years, the clerk, the neighbor, the civilian, was being stripped away layer by layer, until only Cassandra Vale remained. She showered quickly, letting the hot water burn away the smell of rain, blood, and gunpowder. When she emerged, she wore dark cargo pants, a fitted black shirt, boots laced tight. The mirror on the wall reflected a stranger she had not wanted to see again. The softness she had cultivated was gone. What stared back was sharp-edged, efficient, lethal. She strapped the knife to her thigh, slid the pistol into a concealed holster, and checked the laptop. The screen glowed faintly as she powered it on, the encrypted systems taking time to crawl back to life. Her fingers moved across the keyboard like a pianist returning to a forgotten song. Lines of code, hidden channels, digital corridors of the underworld. This was another kind of battlefield, one she had mastered long ago. She tapped into forums cloaked in anonymity, where contracts were traded like currency, where whispers of mercenaries and shadow wars flickered. The serpent symbol appeared again and again, hidden in metadata, stamped into the signatures of encrypted messages. It was no rogue operation. It was an organized arm of the Directorate itself, the Black Ops machine that had trained her, broken her, and claimed ownership of her life. She leaned back, her breath slow, her pulse steady. The Directorate. The name alone was poison in her mind. They had recruited her when she was barely more than a girl, stripped her of choices, forged her into something unnatural. She had served for years, loyal only because they held her chains. She carried out missions across continents, missions no government admitted existed, where death was delivered in whispers and shadows. But she had broken free, burned her trail, vanished. She thought she had erased herself well enough. Yet here it was, the serpent rising again as though mocking her. Cassandra clenched her fist, nails digging into her palm. This was no simple cleanup job. Someone high in the Directorate wanted her not just dead, but erased utterly, her ghost dragged back into the dark and snuffed out. That meant they feared her. And fear was a weapon she could wield. She pulled up blueprints of the city, old maps she had stored in the laptop's archives. Safe houses, exit points, abandoned tunnels. Her past self had prepared for a day like this, even if her present self had hoped it would never come. She traced routes, noting choke points, surveillance clusters, weak spots in the city's arteries. She would not wait for them to come again. That mistake cost lives, hers if she was unlucky, others if she failed. Instead she would strike. But to strike, she needed information. Who had signed the contract? Who stood high enough in the Directorate to unearth her name and unleash the hunt? And what was their motive beyond vengeance? She doubted it was just her defection. Power was always layered, motives always tangled. Someone wanted her silence to cover something larger. Her thoughts drifted to the 12 men she had left broken in the alley. By now they had been retrieved, interrogated, or abandoned. She knew the Directorate well enough to understand how little they valued pawns. If those men had failed, replacements would already be en route. They wouldn't throw another blunt ambush at her. They would escalate, tightening the noose. That gave her only hours, maybe less, before the next wave. She needed to move first. She opened another encrypted channel, one she hadn't touched in years. A name sat at the top of the contact list, one she had sworn she would never call again. Elias. He had been her handler once, long ago, before she burned her bridges. A man with his own ghosts, his own regrets. She had left him behind to protect him, to sever the ties that could kill them both. But now, survival outweighed promises. She typed a single phrase, "The serpent coils again. Need intel." Then she hesitated, fingers hovering. What? She sent this, there was no undoing it. If Elias was compromised, she would be walking into a trap. If he wasn't, he was her only link to the Directorate's inner rot. She hit send. The message dissolved into encrypted fragments and vanished into the ether. The silence afterward pressed heavy. Cassandra paced the length of the apartment, pistol in hand, every creak of the old floorboard setting her nerves on edge. Minutes stretched. Then the laptop chimed softly. A reply had arrived. Bell. You should have stayed gone. They're calling you a liability. Black Serpent directive is active. Me? Usual signal. Her chest tightened. Elias was alive. More than that, he was warning her. But the phrasing was careful, as though every word carried double meaning. He had left the choice to her. Meet him or disappear again. She stared at the message, then at her reflection in the darkened window. Rain streaked down the glass like veins of silver. Ordinary was gone. The ghost was awake. She typed back, 1 hour. Location secure. She shut the laptop, slid it into her bag and doused the lights. Her weapons were secure, her body tuned for violence. Somewhere out there, the Directorate waited, hungry to reclaim their runaway phantom. But Cassandra Vale was no longer running. Tonight she would start pulling threads. And with each thread, she would unravel the serpent until its head lay crushed beneath her boots. The chaos of the ambush still lingered in Elena's senses as she pressed deeper into the compound, every movement measured, every breath steady. The night air carried a metallic tang of spent ammunition and burnt propellant, mixing with the faint scent of gasoline leaking from a ruptured barrel she had left behind. She knew reinforcements were coming. The 12 enemies she had eliminated in minutes were only the tip of a much larger spear aimed directly at her. This mission wasn't over, In fact, the real fight was only beginning. As she slipped into a long corridor lit only by the dim glow of failing emergency lights, she reminded herself of her purpose. This wasn't about survival alone, it was about ending the chain of terror the organization had woven across borders. She hadn't been deployed here to escape. She had been sent to erase. The compound itself was a labyrinth. Every turn seemed deliberately designed to confuse, with branching hallways and locked doors concealing hidden chambers. She moved like a shadow, brushing the walls with gloved fingers, eyes darting between corners, ears attuned to the faintest shuffle of boots or metallic clink of a weapon being readied. Her senses were so finely tuned that she could almost feel the vibrations of movement echoing through the structure. She paused suddenly, crouching low by an intersection, her heart rate lowering deliberately through trained breathing. Two armed men emerged from a far door, talking in clipped tones. Their rifles were slung lazily over their shoulders. They weren't expecting anyone to be inside. Elena melted into the darkness, body aligning with the shadows until she was invisible. She let them walk past, listening to their words, noting every scrap of intelligence. They mentioned the package being secured in the north wing. The word struck her like a bolt of electricity. That was her target, the package. But what they meant wasn't yet clear. Was it a weapon? Was it data? Or was it someone? She couldn't risk guessing. She had to confirm. She followed at a distance, silent as a predator trailing prey. Every step was calculated, weight shifted to avoid squeaks or crunches. The men entered a security post with heavy blast doors, swiping keycards casually. Elena cursed under her breath. Getting inside wouldn't be simple. She waited, memorizing their codes, the timing of the door's closing mechanism. When the steel barriers hissed shut, she moved in quickly, studying the locking system. It wasn't just electronic. It had biometric layers, retinal scanners, and heat sensors embedded in the frame. Breaking through by force would trigger alarms, and she couldn't afford a firefight here. Not yet. She would have to find another way. Her training replayed in her mind, every lesson, every failure drilled into her bones. She recalled a back-channel ventilation grid rumored in the blueprints she had memorized before the mission. If it existed, it would run parallel to the northern wing's main artery, bypassing these doors entirely. That was her way in. But it also meant crawling through a space designed not for people but for filtered air. Tight, claustrophobic, dark. She didn't hesitate. Missions like this left no room for comfort. She backtracked silently, retracing her steps until she found the access hatch hidden behind a stack of supply crates. One by one, she shifted the crates without a sound, crouched low, and pried open the hatch with her knife. The scent of dust and old machinery puffed out at her. She slid inside. The shaft was narrow, forcing her to move on elbows and knees. Metal groaned faintly beneath her weight, and she froze, counting the echoes, making sure no guard had heard. Sweat slicked her back beneath the tactical suit, and the air was hot and suffocating, laced with the smell of oil and iron. For many, the space would have been unbearable, a coffin of steel pressing inward with every breath. For Elena, it was simply another battlefield, one where patience and silence were her weapons. She crawled forward, muscles burning, until faint light seeped through the vent slits ahead. Below, she could see another squad of guards, heavily armed, patrolling near a reinforced chamber. Their leader barked orders in a harsh dialect, pointing toward the reinforced door. Elena's pulse quickened. That had to be where the package was being kept. She remained motionless, observing every detail, the placement of guards, the rhythm of their patrols, the timing of their glances. They had discipline tighter than the earlier men she had dispatched. Whoever, or whatever, was inside that room was valuable enough to warrant elite protection. She couldn't take them all head-on. She needed a distraction. Carefully, she slid back a few feet and located a weak grate in the shaft. With a soft twist, she loosened a bolt and let the grate fall silently onto a stack of old pipes below. Then she shifted backward, creating distance. The clang echoed just loud enough to draw attention. The squad leader snapped orders and two men broke off to investigate. That was her window. Moving like quicksilver, Elena slipped from the vent, landing soundlessly behind the patrol. Her knife flashed once, twice, and the two rear guards dropped without a sound. She dragged their bodies into the shadows, her motions fluid and ruthless. The remaining men hadn't noticed. Their focus was on the false disturbance. Elena melted closer, silent, waiting. When one turned just enough, she struck again. Fast, surgical, her movements honed by years of merciless training. Within moments, three more lay on the ground, their rifles unused, their lifeless eyes staring into nothingness. Only the leader remained, barking into a radio demanding updates. He turned just in time to catch a glimpse of her, but too late to stop the barrel of her silenced pistol pressing against his temple. A whisper, a click, and silence reclaimed the hall. She pressed her ear against the reinforced chamber door, listening. A faint hum resonated from within, unlike anything mechanical. She knew. Her instincts prickled. She retrieved a stolen keycard from the leader's belt and swiped. To her surprise, the locks disengaged, the heavy door sliding open with a hiss. She raised her weapon, ready for anything. What she saw inside made her pause, her steady composure cracking for the briefest moment. The package wasn't a device or stolen data. It was a person. A young girl, no more than 12 or 13, sat bound to a chair in the center of the room. Electrodes were attached to her skin, feeding into machines that hummed with strange energy. Her eyes, wide and glassy, reflected both fear and an unnatural glow, as though something inside her pulsed with power. Elena's chest tightened. She knew then that this mission was far beyond what she had been told. The enemy wasn't guarding a weapon, they were making one. And that child was at the heart of it. Elena holstered her weapon and moved quickly, cutting the restraints, pulling the electrodes free. The girl whimpered, her voice a fragile thread. They said I'm dangerous, she whispered. Elena crouched to her level, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. You're not dangerous. They are. You're coming with me. But even as she said it, Elena felt the ground vibrate, alarms blaring across the compound. The eliminated guards hadn't gone unnoticed for long. Reinforcements were mobilizing and time was running out. She lifted the girl into her arms, light but trembling, and made for the ventilation shaft. The child clung to her, whispering half-formed words in a language Elena didn't recognize, as if reciting fragments of a dream. The corridor behind them erupted with gunfire. Bullets sparked against the reinforced walls, forcing Elena to duck low, shielding the girl with her body. Her mind raced. Escape routes, fallback plans, contingencies she had drilled into muscle memory. There was only one viable option: fight her way back out the way she had come, through the labyrinth of corridors and into the open night. She adjusted her grip on the girl, tightened her jaw, and moved with renewed determination. Every step she took was another declaration of war against the people who thought they could use innocence as a weapon. She had eliminated 12 enemies in 5 minutes earlier that night. But now the stakes were far higher. This time she wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for the girl. And Elena knew with bone-deep certainty, nothing and no one would stop her. The night air was heavy with smoke and the metallic sting of blood, but Elena did not allow herself the luxury of fatigue. The warehouse was a ruin of shattered steel and charred crates, the corpses of her enemies strewn across the floor like discarded shadows. She stood in the center, chest heaving, her hands still steady despite the violence she had unleashed. Around her, the flames licked higher, threatening to engulf everything. But Elena's eyes were already fixed on the shadows beyond the broken walls, because she knew this was not the end. The 12 she had slain were not the only hunters. They were the first wave, expendable pawns sent to test her strength. Now the real predators would come. She sheathed her knives with deliberate calm and slipped into the deeper darkness, her mind already calculating her next move. The city above her still believed she was ordinary, a woman who worked quietly in a cafe, blending in with tired commuters and laughing children. But those who had seen her tonight would never forget, if they lived long enough to tell the tale. She reached a narrow alley, her boots splashing in filthy puddles as the sound of distant sirens grew. Authorities would swarm the wreckage soon, but none of them would know who had done this. Elena left no evidence, no trail for ordinary law enforcement to follow. Her war was invisible to them. She paused under a flickering neon sign, tilting her head as she listened. Beyond the static noise of the city, she detected the faint hum of drones, military not civilian. They were scanning for her, circling like vultures, but their sensors would not easily catch her. She pressed a device to her wrist, activating a signal jammer that bent their detection fields away. The technology was not something she had stolen, it was hers, built with knowledge most people thought impossible. She kept moving, her mind flashing back to the encrypted message she had intercepted earlier in the night. It had confirmed her suspicion. The syndicate was not just hunting her, it was mobilizing to cleanse the entire city. Her face was a target, but she was not the only one in danger. Thousands of innocents would suffer if she failed to strike first. The rooftops became her path as she scaled a fire escape, her movements swift and precise. From above, the city stretched like a labyrinth of steel and glass, bathed in harsh lights and deeper shadows. Her vantage point allowed her to see the convoys forming far below, black vehicles, tinted windows, armored escorts. She knew what they carried: weapons, data cores, and prisoners. The syndicate always collected prisoners before an operation, taking anyone who might resist or inspire defiance. Her pulse quickened as she spotted one of the vehicles pulling into an underground complex. That was where she needed to go. She crouched low, feeling the wind bite her skin, then leapt across the gap between buildings with the grace of someone who had been trained for war since childhood. She rolled onto the next rooftop, rose, and continued her run, each stride a reminder that hesitation was death. She had learned that long ago, the night her world had burned. Hours earlier, she had been surrounded by flames, facing 12 killers with no fear. Now she faced something much larger, an entire organization, one that had already infiltrated governments, corporations, and militaries. To destroy it, she could not simply kill. She needed to break its spine, sever its communication lines, cripple its network from within. That meant finding the central hub, and the prisoners they had taken were her only lead. She reached the edge of a skyscraper and crouched, scanning the fortified complex below. Guard towers lined the perimeter, their searchlights cutting arcs across the streets. Automated turrets stood like statues, silent but deadly. The syndicate had not wasted resources. This was a fortress. A normal person would have turned away. Alara smiled. She slid a rifle from her pack, its black surface gleaming faintly under the moonlight. This weapon was custom, designed for silence and precision. She fixed her eye to the scope, adjusting the calibration until the guards on the towers snapped into sharp focus. She watched their patterns, their careless movements, the rhythm of their rotations. Every detail mattered. A single mistake could alert the entire compound. She waited, counting breaths, then squeezed the trigger. One guard dropped soundlessly, his body folding into the shadows. Another followed. She worked quickly, every shot placed with surgical accuracy, until the towers were blind. She packed the rifle away and prepared for entry. The compound was not impregnable, it was a puzzle, and puzzles were what she excelled at. Dropping down from the rooftop, she moved like a whisper along the edge of the complex, her form blending into the darkness. She reached the wall, placed a palm against its cold surface, and activated another device. The scanner mapped the electromagnetic